The Robert Scott Bell Show.
One thing you be sure we've done over the years here on the Robert Scott Bell Show, and of course it's only been rollicking and rocking even more since Liam has come around, Liam Scheff here, talking about rocking the AIDS world, is particularly the HIV equals AIDS world.
Suzuki
sidekick. That's right. Yeah. That's right. You've been dubbed that by was it my mom or my great aunt? You got to say you can't say no to mom on those.
I cannot. I am the sidekick.
No, but we have been tackling this in media and broadcast media for many years. You've of course been writing about it as such, and we've seen people come and go that have been attacked or attackers. In fact, we've had Professor Peter Duesberg, a number of times over the years, as well as many of the so-called AIDS denialists, which we say are not denying AIDS. We're acknowledging the fact that the science doesn't support the whole hypothesis that HIV causes AIDS. I think we pretty much dismantled it so well on the World HIV Fraud Liberation Day, which was other people call it World AIDS Day last December 1st, I believe it was. Liam and I did this. And now somebody say, well, why do you need to revisit it? What more could be happening now? Of course, there are a lot of people that still haven't gotten the memo. And Liam, we've got a little bit more happening. Part of this has to do with sham peer review, the medical journals, the corruption of the medical journals, that they don't publish things that defy or, let's say, threaten consensus on certain issues. But there's a new article that came out that actually was really going where I was shocked to see anybody would publish, but there was some monkeying behind the scenes to change the title as such. And we have a guest coming up, Terry Michaels, who I'll let you introduce in a moment there, Liam, but I just want you to set the stage for why we're bringing this up against it. People go, oh, come on, you've already dismantled this. Why you got to go there again? Well, there is a reason. And Liam, you're here to reveal it.
Well, Terry's a friend and a great journalist. He's a serious journalist, unlike myself, who's a sort of the clown prince of journal. No, I clown around.
The dark prince.
The dark prince, the clown prince, the Suzuki prince. The Liam, the geisha that he is. That was from last week.
Okay, those of you not listening to the show, inside the Robert Scott Bell Show joke, but you're in on it if you listen every day.
If you listen every day, yes. Take out your decoder ring and see what all of those things mean. Terry's a great journalist. He taught at university. He's run a non-profit journalism school for teaching journalists how politics works, politics, exactly. Yeah. I would stutter when I say that, for 20-some years or so. And he is somebody who is familiar, well acquainted with the history of the gay community, the history of the so-called gay plague, and he has a very different point of view, having lived through it, observed it, having thought the conventional way for a while, then was courageous enough to take on the critical information and say, holy smokes, and maybe we can let him tell that story himself. The article that's come out is our friend Peter Duesberg.
Give me a Duesberg imitation.
Bunnies! They're blowing up bunnies with nuclear bombs.
That's Peter. He's a funny guy, and he likes to laugh a lot, and he makes great jokes. But evidently, is Nature the journal here? Nature is the journal, International Weekly Journal of Science.
Well, Nature's beating up on him for having his paper published, and he got his paper published in an Italian journal. Hey, don't make fun of the Italians. They're very smart people, except they won't let you pay for anything with cash anymore.
No, the lira is gone. The euro is limited to 1,000. Otherwise, no cash.
The Italian Journal of Anatomy and Embryology. Anyways, a great paper published with Marco Ruggiero and many, many authors. And I'll let Terry tell the story, but a couple years ago, the AIDS crazies, John P. Moore and Gene Bergman and Nathan Geffen, these just total psychopathic losers, and I say that without any love in my heart or none lost. And I'll tell you why I say that later. I won't just call them names. I'll give you a reason for it. These people who want to just destroy everybody in South Africa, they want to drug the black people to death. They want to circumcise them. Terry has stories about that. They want to kill orphans in New York, and when they do it, they cover it up. And when I pointed it out, they said, oh, nothing's bad here. And all these children died, and we couldn't do anything about it. That's why we drug them to death. Give us more money. They're crazy. I mean, I'm telling you, firsthand experience, they're crazy. And the AIDS Truth Group comes out, and the AIDS Truth Group managed to sort of ghostwrite, apparently, this article for Nature, which is supposed to be a medical journal. Well, we've never heard of corruption in the medical journals. So Nature covers this article that comes out in the Italian journal, and it essentially says to all the Americans, don't pay attention to this crazy article. Don't pay attention to it. And I'm going to save it to Terry to talk about what's in the crazy article that you're not supposed to pay attention to.
And what was the title of the article originally, by the way?
Oh, I don't. The original article that was
published in the Italian journal.
It was. Bippity boppity boopity. No, I don't know.
Now, let's bring Terry Michaels up. Terry, welcome to the Robert Scott Bell Show. So pleased to have you on board here. Glad we can kick this topic up a few notches.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Liam. It's an honor to be on. You guys, I know a huge amount about the biggest fraud in medical history and the most health harming, with its psychological terrorism of millions of my fellow gay men and now tens of millions of black Africans, not to mention the physical health harm of the so-called life-saving treatments. The paper that was written most recently by Peter Duisberg et al. And Marco Ruggiero, who's there's a long list of authors here, was in the Italian Journal of I'm getting the correct name, an Italian Journal of Anatomy and Embryology. In Italy, they're not afraid to take this on.
Isn't that strange?
In a peer-reviewed journal.
No, the Italians, Ruggiero and others have been pushing this for quite a while. So for some reason in Italy, and we can get into the social dynamics of that, I guess they just don't have the population, or they don't have the gay mafia or the AIDS mafia, or they don't have the hatred of black people, or whatever it is. But anyway, I'll let you continue. So the IJAE, that's really hard to say. That's a lot.
Yes, it is. But in any case, it is a rewrite of a paper that was done in a publication, non-peer-reviewed, called Medical Hypotheses, published by a big medical health publishing corporation, I think, called Elsevier. And this one was just blasted by the HIV/AIDS industry. And even one of these jokers, whose name I can't remember, tried to get Duisberg brought up before an ethics committee at Berkeley. And it was just such absolute nonsense that, and finally the university said there's nothing to this. It was just mischief on the part of the freaks at the HIV/AIDS cult.
Yeah,
so anyway, so what Peter did and Marco and his co-writers did was to rewrite it a little bit and publish it in this peer-reviewed Italian journal. And that's what Nature decided to do for whatever reason. And I can't quite tell why. It's written by a freelancer writing on health called Zoe Corbin out of San Francisco, an Australian who lives in San Francisco. I Googled her and found in her LinkedIn biography, voila, she's a former assistant press officer for Nature. And she quotes in this article somebody from the Treatment Action Coalition, their PR person, as their scientific expert. So I don't know where it came from. It could have been commissioned by Nature, where she used to work. She could have just pitched it to Nature, because she has written on this subject of that Elsevier article, that medical hypothesis article before. Or it could have been promoted by this PR guy at TAC or TAG, whichever you prefer. So I can't quite tell what the motivation was, but the upshot of it is that this paper in Nature is sort of a foil, so that the HIV/AIDS industry can say, as Liam just noted, hey, there's nothing to this. It's just these crazy denialists out there who got their stuff published in this little unimportant Italian journal.
So that's the distraction. The distraction is now set up, and Nature really sits higher in the hierarchy than the IGIA paper. But now that we know that, and by the way, the Nature article, it really just spends all its time quoting these nothings, not researchers, pharmaceutical, what Clark Baker colorfully calls pharma whores, pharma sluts. That's his language. He calls them that. He has a reason to. People who get millions of dollars to lobby poor people to take drugs that kill them. So that's what this Nature article is about. They've set up the smoke
really
screen.
Interesting part of this Nature article is down in the comments, of which there were scores. You have this guy from AIDStruth.org, anything but, engaging in ad hominem attacks against those of us who are rethinkers. He writes to an editor saying, your headline's wrong here. You're saying that these guys are denying in their IEJE paper. And it ought to be changed.
Right.
So the editor.
The title, though, the title was
changes it to refutes.
The title was paper refuting,
right? That was the word.
AIDS, and the information officer, the treatment action group, whatever, the pharmaceutical propagandist writes to the editor of the medical journal and says, "You can't say refuting. You can't say refuting. You have to say denying."
Right.
They have to have the magic word.
I'll correct myself. I said just the opposite. It was refute, and then the editor changes it to deny. And then the next strange thing happens. There's this long series of comments, and they all disappear.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a claim on the Nature paper, well, there was a technical difficulty, and we had to pull down all the comments.
Were there any other technical difficulties on any other article with comments?
Yeah, I have asked them that in an email. I've gotten no answer yet.
Chances are not.
It is all so shady. It is all so questionable. But again, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this article, but I think it just reflects the intensity with which the HIV/AIDS industry or cult, or whichever you'd like to call it, I like to call it both, has attempts to protect the unprotectable, and that is their weird cult-like belief in this preposterous theory that a single retroviral pathogen could cause an amorphous syndrome. So you can just tell it. You can just read the comment string, just as you can on any of these comment strings when the HIV industry is in high dudgeon and goes after us denialists to the point. Just ad hominem attack after ad hominem attack.
Were the comments saved? Did OMSJ save the comments?
Yes. I've actually had a couple of people send them to me. Actually, Val Turner at the Perth Group sent them to me.
We'd like to get them.
Christian Biala sent them to me. Some people. That's something I always try to remember. Whenever anything crops up, save it to PDF.
Terry, we'd like to get a hold of those comments as well, so we can publish them if they have not.
I'll send them to you. They're lengthy, and still, as of an hour ago, they have not put the comments back up.
But they live on the web.
Now, I want to add something here, Terry, as well, and this is a reflective of this cult-like behavior within the pharmaceutical industrial complex, much like a military or medical industrial complex. In the realm of vaccines, we saw the attack on Andrew Wakefield. The same thing when he simply observed the correlation or the relationship between certain vaccines and gastrointestinal inflammation and autism. And they destroyed this man or attempted to destroy this man, and now he's fighting back. But it's not exclusive to the so-called HIV dogmatists, but it certainly is as warlike as any other realm that I have ever seen in medical so-called science. So
absolutely, because we're talking about huge amounts of money here. Yeah. We're talking about money threatened both in the so-called antiretroviral treatments. That's a market segment, by the way, that CNNmoney.com said in 2007 it was about $8 billion.
$8 billion with a B.
Yes. I looked at the annual reports for 2010 of the top 6 purveyors of the poison, and I added up $15 billion. So in 3 or 4 years, it has doubled in value, and we have the biggest purveyor of the poison, Gilead Sciences, aptly named by themselves for the biblical balm of Gilead. They are responsible for about 7 of that $15 billion, and they have just filed with the Food and Drug Administration to use that highly toxic chemotherapy on HIV negatives as prophylaxis to avoid getting, quote, infected, unquote, by HIV. What that means is they are attempting to create a whole new government finance market because almost all these drugs are paid for by governments. That's why they're so expensive. They cost maybe $100 at most a year to make, and they sell them for about $12,000 to $14,000, and your tax dollars pay for them. It's a huge business, and it's just gotten totally out of control. But follow the money is all you need to do. Now, I'm not saying it's all about money. There are a lot of people out there who really believe.
Terry, speaking of money, we have to take a break and say thanks to our sponsors, or we can't continue. Terry Michaels is our guest here with Super Sidekick. Liam Scheff here, kicking it into gear. We're going to talk about how this impacts you, whether you have ever felt that the so-called AIDS issue would ever impact you directly. It does economically. And, of course, the same things that we follow here with vaccinations and other drugs are very real. But this one is targeting, and in many ways is very racist and very targeting towards specific groups. So we're going to cover this and more as we bring about healing like nowhere else in media right here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Check out all the links at robertscottbell.com. If you have a question or comment, 866-939-BELL. That's 939-2355. Back after this.
Taking on bureaucrats and corporations that would stand in the way of health freedom. Here's Robert.
And we're back. This is the sidekick knocking over the bicycle. How's the bicycle over there?
Well, I'm just enjoying the ride because this kind of information, some people will say, well, you guys are a little wonky on this. We want to make sure we have bridges to everybody. But as I recognize that those people that think, oh, AIDS doesn't have anything to do with me, the fact of the matter is billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money funded by the U.S. taxpayer or borrowed into debt to fund a pharmaceutical, what we call it, needle in a haystack search that the needle doesn't exist even. And that's what we addressed with our World HIV Fraud Testing Day last December. And so this does impact everybody. And, of course, immune deficiency is real, as we don't deny that. But we've talked extensively about what really is the problem, but yet you've got a dying breed within the medical and pharmaceutical profession that are just struggling mightily to hold on to the false paradigm.
So we've got this paper by Duisberg et al., really Ruggiero et al. Et al. Means and everybody else. That's how scientists have to talk because they don't want you to understand them. The paper is called AIDS Since '84, No Evidence for a New Viral Epidemic, Not Even in Africa. Now, Duisberg was accused by the pharma prostitutes a couple years ago of because he says that AIDS is multifactorial, caused by poverty and all the things that it is caused by, drug abuse, poisons, toxic medicines. This is the reality. He was accused by the hate warmongering eugenicists, I guess, who I guess want to drug and circumcise and infiltrate the lives of every poor black person and gay person on the planet, of killing Africans. So Duisberg, because he didn't want to drug people to death and didn't want to accuse them of having some sort of morbid sex problem, was accused of killing Africans. Now this is clearly clever Orwellian doublespeak. So how do you accuse somebody of this? It's pretty tough. They just invented the numbers. So a couple years ago, I remember when I was investigating the Incarnation Children's Center, I picked up the Boston Globe one Sunday at the bookstore where I was working while I was researching and writing. And I picked it up and I showed it to my friends there. I said, this is what I'm writing about. And it said, AIDS numbers for Africa are now cut in half. AIDS estimates for Africa are bogus. And they quote James Chin and other people saying, the numbers we use are all made up. And the numbers we use come from taking leftover blood sample tests from pregnant girls in poor South African and Ugandan towns and running them through these rapid tests that come up positive if you stub your toe on a Saturday. They don't mean anything. And then they just take the leftover blood from pregnancy clinics, and then what? Then they run it through and they project their group of 1,000 or 2,000 women. They project that number onto an entire population of millions of people. Then they get how many? I know Robert wants to say something, but hold on a second. Then they say how many people are infected, then sick, then are going to die based on that one fake testing.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but based on their projections, shouldn't the continent of Africa be decimated at this point? There's no way population could have grown since this time.
Well, population clearly could not have grown. That's why they're accusing Duisberg of having killed all these people. But Terry Michael of Center for Journalism and Politics, Terry can tell us how many people in Africa have actually been born, which is problematic for the number of people who supposedly died.
I got to hear this.
All right, Terry.
Well, I think that there are a couple things that I could point out here. In the Duisberg Ruggiero et al. Paper, they show population growth of about I'm trying to find the numbers here. These are populations starting in the year that this Harvard panel said that withholding of the AIDS drugs by Thabo Mbeki was killing hundreds of thousands of people. 2000 through 2005, the population of South Africa increased from 45 million to 47,500,000. So you got 2.5 million people added to the population. But that really isn't the telling figure. The telling figure is if you're going to claim, as UNAIDS has for the last decade, that 1,000 people die a day in South Africa, 300,000 a year, you've got to come up with some kind of basis for a claim like that. And we've been hearing it for 10 years, and they just make it up. And why do we know they make it up? Go to Statistics South Africa. That is the sort of U.S. Census Bureau and CDC combined, a respected statistical gathering agency that every year publishes a mortality report. They, in their most recent report, say that something like out of these nearly 50 million people in South Africa, maybe 600,000 people die a year. Well, okay, so half of those people have died of AIDS? A big no, because then Statistics South Africa reports, and the latest figures are 2006 to 2008, someplace between 13,000 and 17,000 people, by their own definitions, have died of AIDS.
All right, I'm getting
do the numbers, and let me just do the quick number for you.
Yeah, I'm getting a little lost in the numbers.
Of what
Terry.
Says.
The numbers, again, we're told by the guys who know everything, who want to drug and condomize the entire world, that 300,000 people have died every year. Now, the numbers from South Africa themselves are, no, we've got about 10,000 people dying.
12 to 15.
Okay, 12 to 15. So we're about 285,000 people off from the make-believe number to the actual number. In other words, 300,000 people didn't die every year. In other words, Duisburg... Well, let's talk about population growth. 1980, in South Africa, there are, 29 million people in South Africa. So clearly, the number has to be less than that because so many people... It's not 300,000, it's 10,000. But clearly, the number of people in South Africa, given this great AIDS plague, it's 29 million. It's down to what right now?
Well, frankly, those numbers are suspect. We have no idea what the population of South Africa was in 1980.
Yeah, give me something ballpark. Come on, Terry, you can do that.
That was apartheid. So I would prefer to sort of stick with numbers starting around 2000 after they got their act together, better counting, and that was 45 million versus about 50 million now. So it's gone up about 5 million in the last 10 years or so.
Could that have happened, Terry, in a case where they were 300 to 600,000 dying a year of this thing?
Well, of course, that's the point. It's absolutely impossible.
That is the point.
That is UNAIDS, to boost its budget, coming up out of thin air with this lie. And the reason that they're lying, as I said, is to boost their budgets. This is a fraudulent agency, as John Chin or James Chin, was it, of WHO, basically acknowledges in Brent Leung's movie that he gave them the right stuff. They just used it to make it up. Why? They're extrapolations from exaggerations from tiny subsets of samples of blood samples taken at neonatal clinics. In other words, it's just all made up.
It's all made up.
That is huge, that revelation.
So the number goes, according to the mainstream figures for population, from South Africa of 29 million in 80 to 50 million in the last couple of years. That's not a doubling, but a near doubling, 40% or so. Uganda, similar rate of growth. Let me see if I can find it. You get the idea. 2000 and 2005, South Africa population increased about 3 million, and so on and so forth. It goes the same way. Uganda from 12 million in 1980. Uganda, after Idi Amin, after the disaster of the Western intelligence supported Idi Amin, the decimation of people living there, 12 million people in Uganda, then supposedly ravaged by AIDS. No, ravaged by Idi Amin, ravaged by poverty, ravaged of lack of sewerage in Kampala. I mean, you just have to go up and look up Kampala sewerage statistics. You find people don't have clean drinking water. You find they're drinking out of water that's coming runoff from downstream latrines that are overflowing. This is reported in the standard newspapers in Uganda. But now the number, 31 million people, 12 to 31. No, there's not a giant die-off from a sex disease in Africa.
Not happening. And by the way, Terry Michael is so amazing because, not only does he get it, but here he is at the Washington Center for Politics and Journalism, and his program teaches college journalists about politics. the things that he's done. And he writes for Reason, is that correct? Reason magazine?
Yes, Reason.com, the libertarian publication.
Yeah, and not only that, but we were talking off the air about Antoine Béchamp, Claude Bernard. He knows about the germ theory versus the law of the terrain. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's impacting more positively than anything that fundamentally speaks to the wrong-headed paradigm of those that are trying to defend the indefensible.
As I told you, Robert, off the air, I think my favorite quote is Pasteur's. Bernard was correct. The pathogen is nothing. The terrain is everything. And that's what we're talking about here as to why my fellow gay men were dying of AIDS in the early 1980s. Their terrains were screwed up.
Terrain disease.
We're talking about all kinds of exposure to all kinds of actual old diseases and use of antibiotics. Secondly, we're talking about ingestion of all kinds of toxins, from alcohol to amphetamines to cocaine to nitrites. And third, and this isn't to be underestimated, and the more research I've done on this, the more impressive I find it, and that is the psychogenic effects of stress, fear, depression. And remember, in the early 1980s, we were this incredibly hated minority. And you tell somebody that their sex is going to equal their death, that's going to stress you out. So you put those things together, and that's why people were dying of immune deficiency. And that was the original theory, of course, that Joe Sonnabend was really bringing up when he advised gay men, hey, you got to change your lifestyle in the late 1970s.
Yeah, but you can't live that way and expect to be healthy, be living on antibiotics for everything. And that's like then the death stick was pointed at you as if you were from a primitive tribe, that the phantom retrovirus never caught in the act of doing anything. It was going to kill you whether you did anything or not. And you did something that actually accelerated your death because it was toxic chemotherapy drugs that they couldn't even use on cancer patients. Go ahead, Liam.
I was just really enjoying what Terry says because the guy lived it. He knows it. And actually, Terry, you didn't always think this way.
No, I'm 64 years old, and in February of 2007, it will be 5 years this next month. I was actually going through, as I do every day, the Hit and Run, which is the blog of Reason.com.
Yes.
And I happened to stumble on this piece by their West Coast correspondent about the case in Australia in which this guy was being charged with having a lethal weapon in his body, HIV. And that led me to Christine Majori's aliveandwell.org, and that started my reading. And I've read every day for 5 years. I've read 20 books. I've read scores and scores of research papers, medical science journals, and I've educated myself as somebody who has a journalism degree from the University of Illinois, approaching this as an investigative journalist. I did the reading. I did what Thabo and Becky did. I did the reading. And you can't understand this unless you do this reading. It is quite complicated. And you got two things at work here, greed, but you also have fear. You instill this incredible fear in human beings about the two things that we think about most, death and sex. At least I do. I'll leave it up to you. And so what are you going to do? You're going to scare people to death. And we did.
And it worked. Well, that's the HIV fraud. Sex and death, you get people anxious about it. You can control them. You can control their minds. And I really think about the gay community and the way you were talking about psychology, the way that it's very difficult to understand. I mean, to say the gay community gives you this false impression of a lot of people who are joined together and have festive parades and so on and so forth and are always a laugh a minute or whatever you think. Or you're Rick Santorum and you think that everybody is as perverted as you fear they are, or as maybe you are. If you're Rick Santorum.
That's what we speculate.
So we speculate. Who knows? Only the shadow. But the reality is...
Well, anyone who wears sweater vest is completely...
Oh, my gosh. Isn't that true?
But the only people who... I mean, imagine that if I didn't say the gay community, but I said a group of orphans. If I said the orphan community, you'd go, oh... And suddenly you think, oh, this is a group of people who probably don't have great self-esteem and have been beaten up emotionally, psychologically, taken advantage of, don't really feel that they have a say or a role in the culture. So if I say the gay community to you, I'm actually talking about, frankly, a group of cultural orphans and people who aren't allowed in the way other people are allowed in, and maybe they don't even have... I've known so many gay men, and their expectations for their lives are so... Frankly, they're pitiful. They bring out just just pity and pathos. You think, really, you're going to sit around all day, watch TV, get a job so you can get drugs on some insurance thing, and then wait to die? That's your life? As a young person?
And we can, again, take it out to any group and look and ascribe those properties to any individual and say this individual is likely going to have an immune deficiency, ultimately just starting emotionally with that kind of viewpoint or let's say self perspective, if you will. So this is a thing that's bigger than a group, yet, of course, group dynamics often rule in media and in economics and pharmaceutical politics. And we bring it back down as all we can do is save the individual from this kind of tragedy and disaster. And these,
as I said, I think that the stress angle on this, going back to the early 1980s when gay men were under incredible stress, as well as stress they've created for themselves or ourselves, you have to really look at this as a major contributor to collapsing immune systems in the way that an insurance actuary can understand. And I would really encourage anybody, if you don't, people sort of make fun of this idea that the psychogenic effects, that stress can make you ill, but hey, take a look at the work of Robert Sapolsky at Stanford and his work with apes in Africa and how stress is a killer. It really doesn't stretch much imagination if you understand the dynamic of what was going on in the late 70s, early 80s to figure out that Soderman was correct. It was a lifestyle of collapsing of immune systems. Yeah. Now, I'm with Kerry Mullis on this. I think this was an experiment gone bad. I'm an atheist. I don't make any moral judgment against my fellow gay men on this. It's an emerging subcultural group at the time in which sex was really a reflection of liberation. But to continue this myth and play into the hands of gay men activists at the time who really said, we want this to be a single pathogen. We don't want to admit our behavior, or the CDC and Gallo and
played right into it.
A bug.
They played right into it, having the basically the boogeyman, so-called pathogen, mysterious super villain, if you will, status. Terry Michael, I greatly appreciate your knowledge and your wisdom in this regard and your willingness to share your experience. I've got the link to your website up at robertscottbell.com. Those who would like to read more, as well as to the original paper and all that's gone around. Anybody that understands immune deficiency or wants to, this is a big part of that, as well as the drug industry's attempt to keep us completely ignorant of how the world and how the environment and the terrain really is the source of our ailments or illnesses and not the pathogen. And Terry understands that, and we appreciate him very much for that.
Robert, could I just do a quick thing here I need to do? My Washington Center for Politics and Journalism has nothing to do with my work here. It's a nonpartisan, non-ideological. Sure. My writing on this subject is at terrymichael.net, and I just need to say that because I am a nonprofit.
I am amazed you're in Washington, D.C., and they haven't kicked you out of the district with this kind of perspective.
It's interesting. I'm 10 blocks from the Capitol, but I don't feel like I'm here in these 10 square miles surrounded by reality. My mind is definitely someplace else.
All right. Thank you, Terry Michael. Thank you, Liam Scheff.